today's video, we'll be talking about pathos and pathos fallacies. In particular, we're going to look at how people try to manipulate the feelings of their audience. The first set of fallacies we're going to look at are the appeal to fear and the slippery slope. In both cases, the people are exaggerating the consequences or possible dangers of an action or event. The appeal to fear uses scare tactics and emphasizes threats or exaggerates the possible danger. In a slippery slope, it makes an unsupported or inadequately supported claim that one thing inevitably leads to another. It may also be considered a fallacy of logos, but we usually put it with pathos because it evokes the fear emotion. Here is an example of the appeal to fear. Go ahead, drink and drive, in which case you're definitely going to end up in jail, a hospital, or the morgue. Of course, trying to scare people into not drinking and driving. Here is a propaganda poster from World War II. It shows an image of a woman being kidnapped by an ugly and scary Japanese soldier. It tells the reader to invest in war bonds, otherwise this might happen to you. This, of course, is appealing to the fear that you're going to be killed by a Japanese soldier. In this comic, it's set in a therapist's office. The patient says, "Would I be a bad father if I just went to sleep and let Lionel jump on his bed all night long?" And the therapist says, "Of course not. There's a slight chance that would lead to a cycle of permissiveness and that he'll grow up spoiled and feeling entitled to the point where he'll become a narcissist and turn to a life of crime." Just kidding, maybe. There's slippery slope, right? The idea that allowing Lionel to jump on the bed is going to turn him to a life of crime. Once again, there is appropriate pathos in this area. Let's say you and your roommate agreed no overnight guests in the dorm room, but one weekend a friend of hers comes to a visit and their car breaks down. The friend can't get a ride back until tomorrow, so you say okay to the friend staying in the room. But then a couple of weeks later, your roommate asks if her boyfriend can start staying there. You point out that you've seen other people in the dorm who ended up having an unofficial third roommate, the romantic partner of one of the official roommates, and it usually gets messy. You point out you want to avoid this. You're predicting a negative outcome, but it's not outlandish. That's what makes it appropriate pathos and not the slippery slope fallacy. Another fallacy is loaded language. In loaded language, the arguer is using slanted or biased language, including God terms, devil terms, euphemisms, and dysphemisms. God terms and devil terms are discussed in the link in the announcements on our D2L page. Here are some ads that use loaded language. Instead of calling it the estate tax, the Republicans have been calling it the death tax, and then they can use coffin to make it look really scary. My fellow Americans. Americans is one of those words that is very powerful in our society. Oh, in the bottom left, hypocrite, really big type. That's a word that evokes emotional language. And then, of course, there's always our go-to in fallacies, Hitler. You bring in Hitler, that's always a fallacy. It's a very loaded term. I want to take a moment to go over euphemism and dysphemism because they're not covered in the handbook very well. So a euphemism is when people use a word or phrase to make something or someone sound positive, good, and likable. So, for example, instead of using the word torture, the Bush administration used the phrase enhanced interrogation, which is a euphemism. It makes torture sound not so bad. Back in the 1990s, there was a lot of guffaws because the garbage collectors wanted to be called sanitation engineers. Once again, trying to make something that's neutral or bad sound positive. On the other hand, we have dysphemisms. A dysphemism is a word or phrase people use to make something or someone sound bad or unlikable. It's often derogatory, offensive, or vulgar. So any kind of really bad insults. So this is, of course, related to an ad hominem or name calling, but there's that emotional component. So a conservative might call someone of a liberal stance libtard, or rather than calling someone a single woman, you call her spinster. So there's that negativity to it. The next group we're going to examine is the appeal to people, otherwise known as stirring symbols, the appeal to popularity, also called bandwagon, and the appeal to tradition. In all three, you have to ask yourself, are we relying too strongly on commonly held beliefs or practices rather than the logical argument. Here is a picture of a car lot, and you can see that it has red, white, and blue flags there. That would definitely be the appeal to stirring symbols, right? Just trying to tap into patriotism. Here we have an example of bandwagon. Everyone else is doing something, so you should do it too. In this case, the ads were saying, these diets, everyone's talking about it, or turmeric, you should be cooking with it too. And that's all really playing into our fear of missing out, right? We don't want to be the ones left behind. We want to be part of the group, and that fallacy plays on those emotions. When people appeal to tradition, when people say, well, we've always done it that way, you have to sit back and think, is that a good enough reason? Or should we consider that maybe we should not do something just because it's been done that way all the time? Now, there can be appropriate pathos appeals in this area. After the Virginia Tech shootings on April 17, 2007, Virginia Tech poet Nikki Giovanni delivered a really powerful convocation address to the community. Many times during it, she said, "We are Virginia Tech." She said, "We are the Hokies," which is Virginia Tech's mascot. You can see she's wearing that Hokies button on her lapel. It was an emotional, gut-wrenching, and truly appropriate appeal for the setting, the speaker, and the audience. So this would not be a fallacy. She truly meant it, and it fit in well with the setting and the argument. Appeal to guilt and pity is when we're hoping that the audience will forget about the real issue and just feel sorry for us instead. In this comic, the student says, "My girlfriend just left me and my dog ran away. You need to give me an A in this class." So that is, ignore all the logic of the argument, just feel bad for me, and then give me the A. Here is an ad that's definitely a appeal to pity or guilt. It is showing an African who looks like they probably could use a little more food, and they're selling this handbag, and the text actually says handbag 32 food for a week, and then text aid. So they're tying in if you want to feed this person, you also need to buy the handbag, which is really weird, but it's definitely an appeal to guilt. So how can we use emotion to connect with our audience in a way that is appropriate and not manipulative? We can set the tone through our proper word choices, making sure that we don't use loaded language. We create a legitimate bond with our audience and consider their feelings and values, fears and concerns, emotional needs and self-esteem, and not be manipulative, but make sure that they are authentically meant. We can also communicate our own emotional investment, so we're not playing with their emotions, but we're part of that speech topic.